welcome to Groundwater Talk Live. I'm Tom Beller, the Groundwater Guy, and today we're going to be talking about something a little different, key performance indicator for indicators or KPIs, as they're known, for effective water utility management. So, before we get going, I want to urge everybody to like, comment, and share. If you do any of these things, it really helps us beat the algorithm and get the word out there. We're starting to build up our subscriber base, and we really want to reach more people because we think we're providing useful information. So feel free to comment. I answer all comments. Like and share. It all helps. Okay, let's dive in a little bit. So key performance indicators is what we're talking about. KPIs really originated in the financial services industry, measuring performance, and obviously, you want to track your performance in financial instruments and all your finances. So that's kind of where it originated. But we found that we can really use them in the water industry. I've been applying them a lot to water well performance and tracking chemical and microbiological indicators of when we might need well rehabilitation. But we can really apply this across the broad spectrum of areas that we have for a water utility. And so what we're going to talk about today is applying KPIs to a water utility, some suggestions in some different areas. And so I'll reference my notes here because I got some stuff scribbled down here, but that's really what we're going to talk about today. And so let's start off with what really are KPIs or key performance indicators. They are at the basic level measurable values that demonstrate how effectively an organization is achieving its key objectives. Now, that's kind of a formal definition, but really what it is, it allows us to track our performance in different areas. A lot of times we at water utilities, they get very busy, and so we're just kind of, for instance, we're doing all our regulatory sampling. We look at it to make sure we're in compliance. We throw it in a file. We never use that information after that. So that's information that you've paid to generate, and you should basically use that. You should track that, and it can allow you to measure and give you a heads up for when problems might be arising. So you can track that, and I'll give you a couple of examples here in a little bit. But I wanted to kind of go through and set the stage first to see how we do this, and then how we apply it, and what different areas we can apply them in. So. KPIs, they provide a clear and measurable means of tracking progress towards targets or basically measuring performance and objective assessments of performance. So you can measure what's going on, and I mainly I'm the groundwater guy. I deal with water wells, so I'm mainly dealing with performance on water wells, and specifically we're looking at the performance of the water wells, and when are we getting to the point where we need to rehab a water well? When are we losing that performance? And we track that, and we can measure that. But once again, that's water wells. You can apply that to distribution, to disinfection, to monitoring water quality. These are all things that are really outside the regulatory requirements, and really a management tool to assess problems before they become really problems that become emergencies. So KPIs also encourage accountability. They create clarity and really foster a data-driven culture and within an organization. And that's kind of a word hash to say basically they allow us to track things and really use the data that we're generating. We have all this data. It's just a lot of times we're not tracking that data, and we can get a lot more use out of data when we actually track it, graph it up, chart it, and then examine it regularly with our board, with the water utility board, with our consultants, whoever that we're doing to track these things and measure our performance and kind of seeing where we're at, and really to give us a heads up. I mean, as we always advise that people have an asset management plan, capital improvement plan, and this actually feeds into that, because if you're seeing a lot of water line breaks or leakage, then really tracking that and seeing the trends indicate maybe your system is aging out. You need to replace certain sections, tracking certain sections of your pipe that's a little bit older to see where you're getting the leaks and breaks. That's all going to allow you to feed back into the asset management plan, maybe adjust that a little bit too. So this is where, having the data, and like I say, we're already generating most of this data. It's a matter of how we use the data is what it comes down to. So basically, we're taking and using as KPIs the most crucial metrics, the basic numbers that indicate the health and success of an organization. These are general organizational statements on KPIs, but really what we're looking at for a water district is we're really measuring and keeping track of our performance and really our assets, how they're performing. So when you come down to it, a water well is an asset. We treat it that way. We should treat it that way. A lot of times it isn't. Your distribution, your storage, your treatment system, these are all assets that need to be maintained. And it's even more critical because our customers, the people that are consuming the water, are really trusting the water utility to provide safe, clean drinking water. And if we got some things that are occurring in our system, and we can get an early warning where we're not able to deliver that water, or we may not be able to deliver that water down the road, then what we need to do is adjust our maintenance or our asset management plan, our replacement schedule to make sure that we're doing that. Maybe tweak our treatment system to adjust to these things. So that's really what it comes down to. Like I say, these are generic definitions of KPIs, but we can dial in for a water district, and which we'll do here in just a little bit. So basically, you can use KPIs. You can come up with KPIs to measure really a broad range of activities, what's going on in your water system. You can even since they came from the financial services industry, you can certainly use them for measuring the financial performance. Are your rates paying for everything in your utility? Those types of things. Customer satisfaction. Really, how many complaints are we getting? And then operations that you can really, how are you performing? How's your storage performing? Your wells, your distribution system, and then even environmental sustainability. That's a thing that people are tracking these days too, because there's a lot of questions, people concerned about that. So you can actually track that and report on that too. So these are just some examples. We'll dive into a little bit more detail here. So the role of KPIs, they can really help water utilities navigate operational challenges by providing not necessarily real-time feedback. We can make that work if for SCADA systems and stuff. We can actually program them up to track some of these things, but over time is what we're looking at is trends in the KPIs. So usually what we do on the well side is we'll set up a dashboard and we'll track these things, and we'll track them graphically and what's going on, so you can get a good visual. And if things are headed in the wrong direction, we know that we need to do something within a certain time frame. We need to have that money available, adjust our capital improvement program to handle that. If we have a well rehabilitation we're going to need to do, we need to make sure the money is there for that. So by tracking these trends, we can make adjustments to the efficiency of the operation. And as I always like to say, ratepayers do not like to be hit with big increases in rates. So if you can have a reasonable capital improvement program that's going to account for some of these things, and you're tracking the trends ahead of time, that's going to make you a little more efficiency and not make your ratepayers upset because you have to go for an emergency rate increase. We've talked about this before, it tends to make a lot of people mad. So, certainly a lot of times you can justify it, but kind of going in and if it's an emergency, it just makes you look like you don't have things properly handled, and your management may not be what it should. So really, what happens is KPIs really play a role in management efficiency and staying on top of things. And so you're being strategic about it instead of just responding to things. And that's really the worst thing you can do in any business, but especially utility that is critical infrastructure, is to just kind of have a reactionary mode. If you can get ahead of the game and be strategic about it, you're going to be so much better off. And in the long run, it's going to cost you a lot less. Emergency repairs tend to be a lot more expensive than planned repairs. It's just the way it goes because as I'm fond of saying, things don't break during normal business hours. It's always 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve or something like that. So, and that's going to cost you when you got to call people out and try to track down parts and stuff in that emergency situation. So by being strategic about it and using KPIs to anticipate potential problems, it's not going to totally eliminate them. Accidents happen, things happen, but you're going to be a lot farther ahead of the curve on that. So in water utilities, KPIs can be used to judge the efficiency of the water supply. How you doing there? Do you have enough? The effectiveness of the treatment processes, the reliability of the distribution systems, and that includes storage, and the adequacy of customer service, among other things. You can get into the management and the financials as well. So we can apply KPIs to all these areas. So by using KPIs to measure and monitor performance, as I mentioned here, we can proactively manage our infrastructure, reduce the risk of system failures, and preempt any issues before they escalate into significant problems. So that's basically what I was saying is it's not going to totally eliminate emergency repairs, but it's going to go a long ways to minimizing them. And you're going to save a lot of money in the long run by being able to anticipate things and plan for them and to manage your system a little more efficiency. And you're going to reduce customer complaints in the long run because, as I mentioned in the previous slide, is that customer service is going to be one of our areas of measurement. And if you have interruptions to your water supplies because you have unplanned outages, then you're going to start getting complaints. If your water comes out of the tap brown, as it's been in Jackson, Mississippi, then you're going to get a lot of customer complaints. And so we want to forestall that and make sure that we've anticipated things. And KPIs are really the key to doing that. And I will say that not a lot of water systems employ this, but it's something that we're really looking at promoting with different water systems and helping them do this because it is so important to be able to actually manage instead of strategic management as opposed to crisis management is basically how I'll put that. So that's really the role of KPIs here. So, and also you can't track what you don't measure. You can't track your performance. You can't track your storage. You can't track what's going on with your distribution system or your wells if you don't measure it. If you don't have some measures and you're not, and then you take that measurement and put it in a system where you can actually track it over time and see what the trends are. And that's really where KPIs are the starting point for that. So we really advise water utilities, big and small. Bigger utilities can obviously afford to get a little more sophisticated with this, but there's some basic stuff that even real small water utilities can track because, as I say, a lot of this data is already being generated, but it's being stuck away in a file somewhere and not being used to its full potential. So we want to take the data we're generating and put it in a form we can use. KPIs are the starting point, and then you plot those KPIs up over time and you track them and you can anticipate your trends. All right, so implementing KPIs, you know what they are now and what role they play. So, how do we actually do this? Well, first of all, we need to define our goals and objectives. And so, this is kind of basic stuff, but so we can look at all the components of our system, define what our goals and objectives are. When do we need to do well rehab? What does our asset management plan dictate in terms of replacement? And is that actually what we're seeing in the field? Can we adjust that? So that's going to be our starting point. Next up, we want to identify our relevant KPIs. They may not be the same for everybody. I'm going to suggest a few that are relevant, but we do work with people on identifying these things and coming up with the appropriate measures. And I'll give you some examples. This is not a rigid structure, but you need to measure what's important to you. I mean, treatment systems are going to vary depending on what your issues are, the type of storage you have, the type of distribution lines you have, whether you have surface water, whether you have wells. This is all going to result in different KPIs that are relevant to your system. So you need to identify what the relevant KPIs are that you're actually going to track. All right, set benchmarks and targets. So, for instance, once again, referring back to the water wells, where we do this a lot, is what benchmarks and targets do we have that we know that we're getting to where we need to do well rehabilitation within the next year or so we can make sure we have that appropriately budgeted for. So that's one thing. And like I mentioned, distribution lines. At what point do we start seeing a lot of breaks and stuff that it gets us to the point where we start need to replace lines, slip them, or whatever you do to repair those lines? What are our benchmarks and targets? Develop a data collection system. Now, this is a challenge for some folks because we're scribbling things down on clipboards or making it in notebooks and it goes in somebody's pickup truck and never makes it into our system. We need to have a data collection system, so when we're out tracking breaks, fixing breaks, we need to have those locations GPSed. We need to know when it was, since we had the last break on that particular section of line. Does that mean the line is an issue? When you're out there fixing the break, what is the condition of the line? These are all data collection items that should be making it into a standard format that goes into the office and gets tracked in at the minimum, a spreadsheet, if not some sort of database. I like to link it back to a GIS type database, so everything is geolocated, so we can get things at a glance and pull up that information based on the GIS map. But even something as simple as a spreadsheet used in conjunction with a map of your system is going to be a lot better than having some relevant data stashed away in a notebook that's in the door of somebody's pickup truck that's running around out there. So that's data that's being collected that is not useful to making strategic decisions as far as the system goes and feeding into the KPI system. All right, so next up, regularly monitor and review your KPIs. I mean, we may have see what the KPIs are telling us, and some KPIs that we've come up with that we thought were relevant may not turn out to be all that relevant and useful. So don't hesitate to change them out, change them up, or just drop them. Determine which KPIs are relevant to different parts of your system, and those are the ones you want to track. What is going to give us the most useful information to make the decisions we need to make as far as keeping our system running as efficiently as possible? So, and the only way you're going to do that is review them on a regular basis. Now, when I say review them on a regular basis, I mean you want to sit down with your board, your manager, your consultant, whoever you're bringing in on your team to look at these things regularly, see what they're telling you, and see if everything's relevant or you have data gaps you need to collect. So this is the value of reviewing things regularly. Don't fall into the trap of plugging these things into a spreadsheet and then never looking at it again. This data is meant to be used, almost on a daily basis to look at things. I mean, obviously not that much, but at least reviewing things on a quarterly basis to see where you're at, what the trends are telling you. Do you have any sudden spikes in things? When things are out of whack, we really need to look at those things. It may not, some of these things, it may seem to be, when we dive in and talk about it, it may seem to be, okay, this is really obvious. But unless you put it on a chart and actually track it, the trends become a little clearer, and then you can start to dial in on what a potential solution is, or even more basic, identifying what the problem is, and then developing a solution around that problem. But you may never see it, even though we're looking at our coliform data, and we're basically checking to see if we're in compliance. And somebody remembers, well, we had a hit last year and then it went away, and but I don't remember exactly when that was. So by tracking it, you can see where you get those spikes, and it may be that something is going on in other places, that other KPIs are telling you that you, when you got the coliform hits, that maybe something else was going on that generated those coliform hits. So we can basically look at improving our system and fixing whatever problem that might be. And I will tell you, intermittent problems are the hardest ones to solve, and that's where tracking KPIs and trends over time can really be helpful in dialing in regular and intermittent problems. So, and forestalling potential issues down the pike. So, you want to communicate the KPI results. It should really be something you discuss at the board meeting. You should put the charts up and show what the trends are, good or bad. I mean, obviously, if they're good, then that's something that you really want to report to your board. And if you got some things that are concerning, then you need to start talking to the board about what kind of finances do we need in place to address these potential issues that are coming up. Is our capital improvement plan adequate for dealing with those things? So by communicating these things internally and with your board, you can basically make sure you have the finances in place to deal with any potential problems. All right. And that feeds into number 7 too, using KPIs to inform decision making. That's going to be management, but also when you need to go to the board to get more money, or even if we need to do, God forbid, a rate increase, we can have the numbers there to back us up and say, look, these are our trends. They're not looking good. We're going to have to make a capital investment that is going to require us to adjust rates, but these are our trends, and so you've got solid information there to justify those things. But even just the day-to-day decision making on where do we allocate our resources can be KPIs can help us inform that decision making capabilities. And finally, continuously improve and refine your KPIs, like I mentioned earlier, as we're monitoring these things. Do we want to measure these things on a more regular basis? Are we getting data gaps? Can we instead of monitoring monthly, do we want to monitor these things weekly and see if we can kind of refine those trends a little bit, or catch some things that may be a little more intermittent and help dial in some of this stuff? And don't be afraid to drop KPIs that are not useful to you. You don't want to have 100 KPIs you're trying to track, and 50% of them are meaningless to you. You want to really have the relevant KPIs, and there's no certain number. It just depends on your system and all the moving parts that are available. I mean, you could have just 4 or 5 KPIs on a real small water system that are really relevant. And I would suggest probably around 10 you'd want to track, 10 to 12. But bigger systems that are a little more complex, that have a lot of different treatment going on, it could be more. But to have like 100 KPIs and you're getting to the point of data overwhelm, that is not a good thing. So you don't want to go there. So you want to launch into the process, evaluate things as you go along, refine your KPIs, and then come up with a good workable tool that works for you. Ultimately, this system is for you at a water utility to help you manage things more efficiently, manage your scarce capital resources, and they are very scarce these days. So we want to manage those as efficiently as possible, and basically, inform our decision making, communicate to the public, communicate to the board, communicate internally with the operator and management to make sure that we're doing what we need to do, and that we got potential problems that are on the horizon that we need to address before they become critical. And so by a constant process of improving and refining those KPIs, we can come up with a workable system. And once again, if there's too many KPIs, then you're not going to pay attention to them. You want to have enough KPIs to measure what you need to measure, but have them be relevant and have them be have enough of them, a small enough number that it's easy to manage, and you can track those and you look at them and review them regularly without having an all-day meeting to go over everything. So that's really what it comes down to. And I think 10 to 12 is a good number. It may be a little less, maybe a little more for most water systems, and I mainly deal with small water systems, and that's probably adequate. You can get through that in a half-hour meeting and see where you're at, and it's easy to send out an email or track online. There's a number of different ways to do this, and in a future show, we'll talk a little bit about setting up dashboards and KPI tracking systems for monitoring your KPIs and your performance of your system. And that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, is really how do you track these things. So I'll do a future show on how to do that. It's kind of outside our norm, but I think it's definitely relevant and important, is how do you track this data. So, all right, so let's dive into a couple examples here just so you can get an idea. Get a drink of water here. Okay, so I'm the groundwater guy, so I deal with water wells, and a good KPI example that we use all the time. And I always tell people, if you don't track anything else with your water well, track specific capacity. It's very easy to measure, and it tells you a lot about the performance and efficiency of that well and when it may be due for well rehab. So this is the example. Specific capacity is defined as gallons of discharge per foot of drawdown in a well. So you need to know your static water level, you need to know your pumping water level, and you need to know your pumping rate. So basically, you're looking at the difference between static water level and your pumping water level, and then you're taking how many gallons of discharge. So basically, if you had 40 feet of drawdown and you're pumping 100 gallons a minute, that would be a specific capacity of 2.5, because you're dividing gallons of discharge or your pumping rate by your feet of drawdown. So, and as you can see, very easy measure to perform. And so you can track this monthly, you can track it weekly. If you have a SCADA system, then it's, so much the better. You can really get this information very easy, and you can track this over time. And really, specific capacity can be used, and we mainly use it to track the need for well rehabilitation. When are we losing enough efficiency that we need to get to the point of well rehabilitation? So say, for instance, a 10 to 15% decline in specific capacity indicates that we got some well plugging going on, and we're going to need to do some well rehabilitation. So it may be that within the next year or so, we really need to plan for some well rehabilitation and start putting that and make sure we got enough money set aside to do that, and basically start getting some bids and start looking at that. Now, if you wait and you got a 25 to 40% decline in specific capacity, that means you got a little bit more urgent need for well rehabilitation and more aggressive techniques, i.e., more dollars may be required. And the reason for this is because um, these mineral incrustations and biofilms that develop that plug our wells really tend to accumulate and harden down a little bit. They become more difficult to clean. You may, on the higher end, around 40%, you may look at something where you can't totally clean that out anymore because it's so locked down. So, at the very least, it takes a little bit more aggressive techniques than a routine well rehabilitation, and that means more money. So by really looking at specific capacity, you can kind of dial in when you need to do your well rehabilitation. So that's really important. And I will say too that when you start to get into 40% declines, then you can start to go downhill really fast. So it actually will it may take a while to get to 10 to 15%, but then as things start plugging up in the well, now your specific capacity starts to go down a little faster, and you can actually lose everything in your well, all the capacity in your well fairly quickly. So it'll tend to accelerate, and sometimes we start to get around the 25 to 40% range, and it'll kind of plateau out. And what'll happen is that the water's getting through somehow, and I've got some well videos that just show some amazing circumstances. You wonder how any water is getting into that well, and so at some point, the last little crevice, that last little hole, last little pathway through the mineral incrustations or the biofilm, all of a sudden seals off, and boom, you go from 40% decline in specific capacity to 100% decline in specific capacity, and there's no water coming out of your well. So this is the urgency and why tracking this particular KPI is important. Now, there's other things we track on water wells, but if nothing else, specific capacity is the one that should be tracked because it's easy to do, really doesn't cost any money, and it's easy to do, and it tells you so much. There are some caveats to specific capacity, like most things, but this is really really a good one and a good example of a KPI here. And this might be what it looks like. This is an example that I pulled off the internet, and we can see we got 5-year intervals along the axis on the bottom, and then we have specific capacity on the vertical axis on the left there, and you can see that we start off up there in I guess that's 1970. You start off right around 130, and then over time specific capacity starts to decline, and we see that curve there, and all the little dots are measurements of specific capacity, and usually it's not quite this pretty. This is kind of an idealized diagram for the sake of discussion, but we get down to the point where we've lost, in this case, they've lost 50% of their specific capacity, which is not good, and so that little star there down below is where they've done well rehab. And so because it declined so far, they may have only gotten back not all of their original capacity in this well. So you may start off at about 115. So and then we see the decline, the short-term trend decline again, rehab again. They're letting it decline, almost 50% again. So these little curves should be shorter, and then you may be bumping it back up around the original capacity. But what we can see here is on that second curve, we got the short-term trend. If you just didn't rehab this well, then you're going to see that you're not going to, that well is not going to last real long from this point. You're going to see it's going to go to zero specific capacity in probably about 20 years. So now, generally, it's going to be a little bit longer. It depends on the geology and the groundwater conditions and a lot of different things. But this is just an example for our purposes. Now, by rehabbing on a regular basis, even in this situation where they waited too long to rehab, we can now see up top there the long-term trend. So compare the long-term trend with the short-term trend, and you're looking at a well life that is probably at least 4 or 5 times what the short-term trend would be if there'd been no well rehabilitation done. So this is where tracking KPIs, in this case, specific capacity, really comes into play, and it's a useful tool. Very visual. You can see here, this is very visual. You can look at this, you can sit down in a meeting and you can discuss your trends and say, hey, we're getting down here. Our chart is showing, we're losing 10 to 15% in our specific capacity since our last well rehab. We need to start thinking about doing this again before it becomes too bad. And then you can restore. Generally, if you're doing well rehab when you're around 10 or 15% decline, you can get it back pretty close to what your original capacity was. You wait too long, you're getting this situation here. But even in this situation here, you can see that the long-term trend versus the short-term trend is a pretty remarkable contrast. So that's where we want to be, and this is a good example of a KPI. Another example might be water main breaks. Now, you can argue that, okay, we know that we got breaks and we track those things and they're written down in a notebook somewhere. But what happens is it's hard to quantify that and look at trends when you're just looking at individual numbers or trying to recall from memory, which is what a lot of us do. And especially smaller water districts. So basically, you should know how many miles of pipe you have in your distribution lines, and so you can take the number of water main breaks per 100 miles of pipe. You can track that over time, and if it's increasing, then we got some issues with probably aging out or defective pipes, and we need to investigate that a little farther. You can actually dial this in a little bit more, and if you have pressure zones or different ages of distribution lines, you can actually have KPIs per section of your distribution system, and so you can see where you can adjust these things a little bit and come up with custom KPIs that are going to help you dial in on things. And so if we break it down to by parts of the system, then we can see, okay, we have a pretty high number here, and it's going up, of water main breaks per 100 miles of pipe. And over here, it's a pretty low number. So that section of the pipe is good. This section of the distribution system really needs some attention. We need to go back and look at our asset management plan and see when we're scheduled to replace, and maybe make some adjustments there. So it really does help refine the asset management plan. And so these are some examples. I'm going to now go through some different areas here, and I'm not going to necessarily get into specific KPIs, but talk about different areas to kind of get you thinking about how you might apply some of these things. And certainly I'm happy to talk with anybody about developing these things. If you got questions, drop it in the comments, and I'm more than happy to give some suggestions. All right, so here's kind of our major areas that I broke it out. You can break it out a little bit differently if you want, but I'm looking at developing KPIs for water supply, for disinfection, for water treatment, water storage, water distribution, and then management and customer service. So that's kind of the operations part of things. So the management part of things, and then 1 through 5 are actually the actual on the ground operations part of the utility. So water supply, we already talked about specific capacity for wells. Another KPI is really gallons per kilowatt hour. This is a way to get at well efficiency, because a well that is plugging up, a well that is not as efficient anymore, it's losing efficiency mainly due to plugging or maybe some other problems. is going to pump fewer gallons per kilowatt hour. The pump is going to be working harder. The water level may be dropping. And so the pump is going to have to work harder. You're going to get lower production per kilowatt hour. So this is just a simple thing. This is really easy to do because once again, you have the gallons you're pumping. If you have a separate meter for that particular well or part of your system, then you should have that information, and this is a really easy calculation. I actually had a small water system that they plotted this up and could really see the curve and decline and said, yeah, we got some problems with efficiency in our water wells. So just by doing that, they didn't even have to go back and do the specific capacity, although I do advise the specific capacity. So water production capacity. Now, this is something, and let me just look at my notes here real quick. This is something where you're really looking at things like what is our maximum daily production capacity? What do we have? And okay, this is separate from something like maximum daily demand. That's what the customers are looking for, or that's how much that is demanded on our system. But what actually is going to be our maximum daily production capacity? And so if that is going down, then there may be a point where the maximum daily production capacity that you're tracking meets or falls below the maximum daily demand. And if we see that trend happening, then we really need to seriously look at developing additional capacity. So you can see maximum daily demand is not the same thing. That's something that's kind of mandated in our TMF requirements. But by tracking what our actual production capacity is, how much can we produce to fulfill the maximum daily demand? Now you can start to see and develop a pattern and look and see, are we going to need additional capacity down the road? And you can plan for that and set aside the money in the KPI. So that's let me get back here. So water source reliability is another one that we track. So number of days with supply disruptions or percentage of time with sufficient water reserves. These are just some examples I came up with here, but what is our reliability? I mean, are we having service disruptions, and do we need to do something about that? And sometimes you may think but if you're actually putting it down on paper, tracking it in a chart, then you're going to say, our reliability is going down. We're having more service disruptions, and here's a pattern, and then you can track it back to some other things. So once again, that's important. And finally, water quality. Now, a lot of things, when it comes to water quality, we have mandated regulatory requirements for testing, and this is all well and good. Like I say, a lot of times these results, they come in from the lab. We got to do the testing. We send off the samples to the lab. Lab sends us a report back. We look at it, see if we're exceeding anything, and if we're not, or even if we are, we take the appropriate action. The results get shoved in the file and never looked at again. And when they really should, you've paid for that data, you've paid for that testing. You should really be taking those results and plotting them up in a chart and tracking them, because it's data that you already have that you paid for. Why not get some use out of it? So for instance, you can say, okay, this should be obvious, but it may not necessarily be so. You get changes in management and personnel. So really, what percentage of our water quality tests are meeting regulatory requirements? So just on a percentage basis, is that going up and down? Is it staying the same? We should really that should really be close to 100%. And if it's not, then we got to, and it's getting worse, then we really need to start looking at the potential problems. So or getting back to customer service, the number of water quality complaints. People are saying my water smells bad, it looks a little cloudy, it doesn't taste quite right, and those are types of things. So these are things we can track too, and it's separate and distinct from, are we meeting the regulatory requirements? But we're looking at what are our trends actually. So it's using data we already have once again, and maybe some additional data. I mean, we do what we call the well health check process. We're checking some things that aren't normally part of your regulatory requirement, but can really be key in diagnosing problems with water wells. And so that can be part of that as well. So that's that. Let me move on here. Disinfection. This is obviously a really key component, and so we have really several areas we're looking at here. Um, so disinfectant dosage. So you know, average disinfectant dosage. It might be a KPI you could use there. Now, if your disinfectant dosage is going up and you haven't changed anything, then that could indicate problems with your water quality, the bacterial loads coming in, and it may be something that's so subtle you can't really necessarily, it doesn't jump out at you unless you're actually tracking the trends here. So that might be one KPI there. Uh, Disinfection byproducts are a big deal, especially if you're using surface water. The total organic carbon content and the chlorine compounds you use for disinfecting your water interact to form trihalomethanes and haloacetic acids, which are together referred to as disinfection byproducts, and those are regulated, and so we need to track those. Are we staying the same? Are we going up? Are we going down? And it could be that maybe we're getting water now, if we're using surface water, that has a higher organic content, and we need to go back and maybe look at that and try to clean that up a little bit so that we're not getting the disinfection byproduct issues that we need to address. So that's something that you can use to dial in. Microbial contamination, once again, as I mentioned earlier, how many tests are meeting the regulatory requirements? Is it going up? Is it going down? We want that to be at 100%. If it's not 100%, we need to investigate why that is. So, all right. So next on to water treatment. So we got the treatment process efficiency KPIs. So it might be energy use per volume of water treated. And I'm looking at my notes here, which is why I'm looking off to the side. Yeah. I'm violating the rule of not looking at the camera, so sorry. But I'm trying to get some of these things so I can pass them along without making the slides really wordy. So energy use per volume of water treated, especially if you're running like an RO or something like that, could indicate that your system isn't as efficient as it should be. There are some other ways to get at that too, but that might be one suggestion. And treatment is going to be highly variable depending on what you're doing. So developing KPIs for your treatment is really going to be specific to the type of treatment. So treatment effectiveness. Percentage of water quality tests meeting regulatory standards that we talked about earlier. That would be before and after treatment. So generally we're looking at after treatment, and is our treatment system failing us, and how often? So that's something we might want to look at too. So sludge, brine, waste management, especially if you have an RO or an ion exchange system, you really want to look at the amount of brine generated per volume of water treated. So that is something that If your contaminant load is loading up your RO more than usual, and you can track that trend, then why is that? Is there something going on with our water quality that's causing our RO system to be loaded up? And you can extend this to other types of treatment. How many if you have a green sand filter, how often you have to back flush. I mean, you can see, depending on your treatment system, it's going to be highly variable what types of KPIs you're gonna use. So I'm just throwing out some general examples here. So and lastly, maintenance. Is, for instance, the number of unplanned maintenance events per year on your treatment system. That might be one way to track. Do we need to replace components or replace the entire treatment system, upgrade it, whatever? So it's something that should be obvious. And a lot of people say, "Well, I know that off the top of my head," but do you really? And by sitting down and tracking the trends and looking at the charts, you're able to kind of dial in on that a little bit. And it, once again, it helps for the planning and budgeting and the capital improvement program. What do you need to plug into that? So, all right. So, water storage. So, storage capacity. Storage capacity for service connection might be one way to look at it, and this is just kind of a general one. But how many gallons of storage do we have per service connection? There are other ways to get at that same type of thing, but that's just a suggestion on one. Your distribution, your storage maintenance might be there. There's some other ways to do that. Your integrity. So, do you have any leaks in your storage? Or are you doing corrosion measurement? So if you have steel tanks, a lot of times you're going in and you're measuring the thickness of the steel in the tank to determine, how much is corroding, if we need to fix that. So you can track those as well, and that type of thing. So that's storage. You can think of some other ways to go on that. How much storage per pressure zone, that might be another one you can look at. So once again, it's real specific to the specific system. So distribution line. So water pressure is an interesting one. So so percentage of pressure tests meeting the target ranges. We're out there testing our water pressure, and because that's a common complaint from customers is their water pressure is too low. The water isn't flowing, so you got to go out and test it, and so you can even measure that by customer complaints for water pressure even. So that's one way to do it. Infrastructure integrity. So that gets into our main breaks per 100 miles of pipe. So that's one way to do that. And the percentage of non-revenue water, so i.e. leaks. So leak detection is a huge deal, and it steals revenue from the system. As we've talked about in previous shows, it does steal revenue from the system. So we really want to make sure that we're tracking those leaks. So that's something that we really want to look at. So let's see. Yeah, so you might want to look at water. Well, I don't have a specific KPI for that. So and then lastly, our management and customer service. So looking at customer service and delivery. So the number of customer service complaints per week. May be one way to look at that. There's other ways to measure that. The number of service outages, we talked about that a little bit earlier as far as distribution systems. And then there's a whole host of financial KPIs we can employ. I'm not going to dive into the financial KPIs a lot because we talked about that a lot as part of TMF requirements. But there are a whole host of them. We could do a whole separate show just on financial KPIs for water systems. Maybe we will if we really want to bore people. So that's that. So all right. So I think that is most of our. Oh, interpreting and acting on KPIs. We want to do regular monitoring and reporting. We talked about this a little earlier. We want to analyze trends and identifying problems, and we want to make data-driven decisions to enhance efficiency. So we may think we know, but by employing KPIs, and it's really not that difficult once you get it set up. So we then have the data at our fingertips, and we can make good decisions based on the data. So we may think we know, and maybe we do, but having the data there to support you really helps you sell things, sell programs to the board and to your customers so that they understand things. Regularly reporting on these things to the customers give them confidence in the management of the water utility as well. So it really serves a customer service purpose as well. So not only can you use the KPIs for managing your system, but also for communicating to your stakeholders. So this is very important. So you can see the value there. So all right, so that's our show for today. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be interested in your comments. If you have any comments, please you can comment on LinkedIn and YouTube. And speaking of KPIs, I do have a little ebook basically on the well health check process as a resource guide really for diagnosing well problems. And this is really looking at using KPIs in a little more detail on checking well problems. So you can find that here. That's a long link there. But it is available. You can download it, and it has some good information. Gives you a little more details on how we deal with employing KPIs and monitoring wells. So here's a QR code, so you can just scan that with your phone if you want. That'll take you right there. So that may make it a little easier. So there's the QR code. All right, so if you want to be a guest on Groundwater Talk Live, and we're always looking for guests, talk about best management practices, this is the link to schedule a time to come on the show, and I'd love to have you if you're talking about groundwater topics or any water topics actually, and utility topics. I'd love to have you on the show. We stream on the Groundwater Guy YouTube channel, and all our past shows are there. We got about 90 videos up there at this point, so there's something for everyone. We also stream live on LinkedIn, and so the show is there as well. And then Twitch, Twitter, and Facebook as well. Don't get as much traction those places. So, but we're there on a number of different platforms. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the Groundwater Guy YouTube channel. Check out our past videos there. Like I say, there's a lot of good information there. I try to provide a lot of good information to folks on a variety of topics dealing with water systems and groundwater issues. So subscribe, hit the bell if you want to be notified when we have a show. We try to do this every Thursday, technical problems aside, at 11 a.m. Central Time. So, and once again, Groundwater Guy channel on YouTube. Thank you very much, and I will see